So we've got a 2023 A3, the 35 TDI to play with today. So this video is just a completely unbiased review. I've had a whole day with this car. I've been able to put it through its paces. So I'll just take you around the car, what I think of it, and give you my thoughts and a realistic review of who this car is best for, and really how it compares to my current A3, which would be the equivalent of a 35. It's 150 horsepower as well. So it'd be interesting to see how the power compares between these two cars and how things have progressed in the 8 years since my car was officially released. It's the 2-litre TDI. It's got a 35 badge on it, so don't get me started on the badges that Audi are using now. It's much more helpful in my book to have the engine size, but I can understand why they don't want to put the engine size, because they're putting small engines in modern cars and supplementing it with electric power. So rather than state a power figure or the engine size, they've come up with this really weird numbering system which goes from about 25 up to about 90. So the bigger the number, the more power you've got. So the 35 is comparable with a 150 brake horsepower engine from times gone by. So the 1.4 TFSI that I have, that's 150 horsepower. So it'd just be interesting to compare the power of my existing car with this new car, which is a 2023 model. It's done very few miles, so I'm one of the first to really get to play with it. It's definitely been broken in. So I've got an Audi A3 TDI. It's the 35, which should really compare well with my existing 150 COD. It'd be interesting to just compare the diesel engine with the petrol engine, just to see how they compare. Initial thoughts are it's quite solidly built. The engine feels quite refined. There's certainly a lot of torque there. It's very, very smooth as well. And it's just got a nice road feel overall to it. So I'm getting used to the automatic because my current one is a manual. So it feels a bit weird not having to do anything with my left leg. But I'm getting used to that. It's quite nice. But it does kick down nicely. There's a decent bit of acceleration, quite good response. I'll put it in sport mode in a minute and we'll see how it does with sport mode. The 0 to 60 time of this car is 8.3 seconds, which is quite respectable, especially when you consider that this car returned around 70 miles to the gallon. So whether you get 70 miles to the gallon when you're doing these 0 to 60 sprints is certainly questionable. But I did see reasonably good fuel economy on my day that I had with this car, despite the fact that I was driving it reasonably hard and getting the most out of it and just fully exploring what the car had to offer. So the A3 range comes in a range of power figures. The base models that you get come from about a 35 all the way up to a 45. The 40 and the 45, I believe, are electrically assisted mild hybrid models. The 30 is underpowered. I've driven one. It didn't feel very lively at all. I'm not really sure who to recommend a 30 to, but the 35 is a really good option. So if you were looking at buying an A3, I would strongly recommend you start with the 35. If you needed cheaper insurance or much better fuel economy, then perhaps the 30 is the option to go for, but it felt really gutless when I drove it. I didn't enjoy it very much at all. So fuel economy figures on this, it's actually very, very good. You can see how these engines have progressed over the years. The UK figures quote around about 55 to 65 miles per gallon. And I can believe that. I got pretty near to that on the test drive in the bit where I was doing fairly careful driving. Obviously, these are UK MPGs. You'll notice that the MPGs quoted in other countries is different, basically because the measurements they use to calculate MPG are also different, which makes sense. So don't compare a US review with a UK review or vice versa. There are going to be differences there in the units that are actually used, even if they're called the same thing, just to confuse everyone. So the gearbox on this is the S-Tronic, a really nice gearbox. So Audi do 3 different gearbox types. They do the S-Tronic, which this has, the Tiptronic and the Multitronic. So the differences between them. So the S-Tronic, this gearbox, is really just like a robot controlled manual gearbox. You've got the option of the paddle shifters. You've got complete manual control over the gears. The gear change is lightningly fast. They have a dual clutch system, and I would challenge a professional driver to match the shift times that you get out of this amazing S-Tronic gearbox. The Multitronic is a continuously variable transmission system, so you're talking about nice smooth transitions between the different gear ratios, and the Multitronic actually uses an array of 6 or 7 clutch discs to achieve those smooth gear changes, but it's not a performance option. So the Tiptronic is more of your classic automatic gearbox with a torque converter. Now they've come on leaps and bounds over the years. The early ones used to be quite slow to engage, quite slow to deliver the power. The modern units are far better than those early ones. But in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of others, nothing can really touch the S-Tronic. And a lot of people that are used to manual cars are going over to the S-Tronic just because it is far superior. So let me know what your thoughts are on different gearbox options. What would you go for if you were buying an A3? Let us know in the comments. The paddle shift adds phenomenally to your driving experience and really makes the car an absolute pleasure to drive. You've obviously got 2 different drive modes. You've got the sport mode and the standard drive mode. So the sport mode hangs on to the revs much longer to give you the maximum performance and changes up and down very, very quickly. When you use the paddle shift, you regain manual control over the gearbox, so it stops making those manual adjustments unless you do something really silly, but you can easily switch it back in. So the general drive mode is really set up for economy. If you put your foot down, it recognizes that. It gives you that little bit of extra performance. But generally speaking, for the maximum fuel economy, the standard drive mode is the mode that most people will be driving around in. If you're wanting to enjoy the drive or overtake something, or have a spirited country drive, then the sport mode really does work. Just kicking down, you really feel the acceleration and it is seamless as the gears change. You almost don't detect the gear changes. It's that quick, that fluid emotion. So in terms of handling, it felt quite nice. It's obviously a newer car than mine, so the suspension naturally feels harder. This had the S-Line suspension, which is notably harder. It's about 40 millimeters lower than the one that I've got on my older model of A3. But I didn't notice every single ripple in the road surface, so it didn't seem to be quite as firm and clinical as the early S-Line suspensions. So I might actually put S-Line suspension on my shopping list when I'm buying a more modern Audi A3, because I'd crossed it off because I just felt the ride was a little bit too harsh. You can have a firm ride with a lot of driver engagement and really enjoy the car, but the older S-Line suspension was just really hard and crashy. You didn't really enjoy the car. It felt like it was bouncing over the bumps in the road. So it does look like they've addressed that and they've come up with a much more refined setup for the suspension on this 2023 model of the A3. The brakes seemed spongy. So I would certainly criticize the brake setup. The brakes on my car have probably done about 50,000 miles on the original discs and pads. Everything is fairly worn. I don't have much life left, but that stopped and braked much more effectively than this. It could be down to the extra weight of the diesel engine perhaps, or just the fact that this was still relatively new and the brakes hadn't bedded in. So I shouldn't be too harsh. Brakes is obviously something you can easily address by changing the pad friction material or changing the discs themselves, or just getting the brake system bled if there was a problem with air bubbles within the system. But I wasn't a big fan of the braking setup on the current 2023 A3. So just looking at the interior, it looks very space age. It looks very, very swish, superficially. When you get inside though and start looking at the plastics, I feel it's got a much cheaper finish. So it still outclasses a lot of other makes and model of car in a similar bracket from other car manufacturers. But compared to the earlier versions, it just has that cheaper feeling. The piano black looks very nice, but it's a fingerprint and dust magnet. It would be a nightmare trying to keep these surfaces completely clean and shiny. The wraparound screen looks good as well on the dashboard. I quite like the way it's set out and the control you've got over the completely digital dashboard. You can shrink the size of the speedo, for example, and have a big map in the middle, which actually can make navigating a little bit easier. But I really don't like touch screens. I think that's probably just me. Let me know what your thoughts are on touch screens. But the actual thought of touching a screen, it fills me with dread. I use computers all day long. I've worked in an office using a computer all day long, and fingerprints on the screen really wound me up. So maybe it's a hang up from those days. And now we're just forced to use touch screens when we go in the car. The controls within the touch screen on the car and the dashboard didn't feel quite as intuitive. So I'll give that a pass though, really.
because I've not had much time to play with it. I was focusing more on the drive than fiddling around with all the gadgets. The system in my old car seemed quite intuitive. I've got that nice central wheel that allows me to control every aspect of the navigation. So I will say that my old system was quite slow to respond. This felt much quicker, much zippier. So they've obviously beefed up the CPU power that's controlling this dashboard and navigation system. Features, this one had lane assist, so it was nice playing with that. It worked quite effectively at keeping me in the lane. Obviously, it's not an auto drive option. It complains quite quickly if you let go of the wheel. If it doesn't have any steering inputs at all, it will moan at you and ask you to take over the wheel. Now, lane assist probably is best suited for highway driving, those long distances where it's quite tiring and it's quite easy to just lose your concentration for a bit and maybe drift out of your lane. But on country roads, what I found was happening was I was moving over the central line to avoid the potholes and the problems that were at the edge of the road. And the lane assist was pushing me back towards the potholes. But it is quite easy to disable the lane assist mode. So you've got full control over it, but just understand the limitations. If you want to veer around potholes on our narrow country roads, then it's not a good option to have on. But on the motorways and the highways and the freeways, it would be a good safety feature to have. Now, it also had adaptive cruise control. Now, this wound me up immensely because you have to subscribe. So I believe if you buy a car, if you buy anything, you should own it. You should own all the bits. You shouldn't have to pay a subscription to keep these things up. I know other manufacturers like BMW have started making you subscribe for the heated seats and other functions within the car. So I really do hope that this doesn't take off, because it's going to be so annoying to have to pay all these additional fees just to fully utilize all of the bits and pieces that you've got on the car. And I bet if these systems broke, you would have to go and pay for them to be replaced, despite the fact that you're already subscribing to have that feature on the car. So please, Audi, Volkswagen Group, all manufacturers, don't make drivers subscribe to features they have on their car. Let them have the feature, but pay monthly for it, like some sort of purchase plan where they will eventually own it, because people are going to be buying these old cars and the subscription feature is probably not going to be available. Those servers are going to shut down at some point. So you're going to have a very dumbed down version of the car. So looking around the exterior of the car, it looks really nice. They've taken the A3 shape and evolved it. The angles are a little more sharp. The grille is slightly wider. I think eventually the grille on these cars is going to be wider than the front of the car. But it looks much more aggressive, much more sporty. This one's black. I've owned a black car. They look fantastic when they're washed for about 30 seconds. But after that, they really do show up every speck and bit of dust and dirt that attaches itself to the paintwork. So black is probably not the most practical colour, but it is one of the nicest looking colours to have on a car. It really shows up the shine that you have on the new paint. Wheel options, the A3 generally comes with a 17 or 18 inch. This was fitted with the 18 inch rims. I'm a bit of a fan of the 17 inches. I just prefer the handling feel. I feel the 18s are a little crashy. They're prone to tramline, or they're more prone to tramline. And in the wet conditions, the low profile tyres you get on the 18 don't give you as much grip as the ones on the 17 inches do. But let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on wheels. Will you be putting 19s on your A3 when you get it? Are you quite happy with the 18s? Have you tried the 17s and 18s to actually compare? I'd just be interested to know what your thoughts are on wheel sizes on the A3. It was around about 2012 that the Volkswagen Group set about a dramatic redesign of the 2-litre TDI engine. The previous EA189 had its fair share of issues and problems. They certainly had improved things from the EA188, but there was certainly a need to improve things further. So the EA288 diesel engine came out, and we started to see it being fitted in cars, and it was a dramatic reworking of this diesel power plant that they'd had for so long. So the EGR has been completely revised. The DPF filters, the regeneration cycles have been changed. It's been resighted. It's much more efficient, so you're less likely to have the problems of your DPF filter clogging up like you had on the early versions of this engine. So the technology that's been used, the direct injection, the DPFs, the EGRs, Volkswagen Volkswagen have really looked at all the inherent problems that people have had over the years and ironed these out. They've looked to design these issues and problems out with the Gen 3 engines. Cars are specifically designed to meet the local emissions standards and regulations. So there's a number of differences in the way these emission systems actually work between different regions. So you do need to be very careful when you get information online that it applies to your engine and not one from, say, North America if you were based in the UK, for example. The fuel system and lots of other components within the engine have been beefed up, which is great news if you're wanting to tune it. It just means you've got a stronger and more reliable base to work from, and you can extract that little bit more power from what the Volkswagen Group have already done. By reducing internal friction in the engine, by improving the control you've got over the fuel delivery, the fuel timing, and the really efficient choices of turbochargers in the 2-litre Gen 3 TDI engines, you've overall got more efficiency. It's a much better design. The engines are lighter than their forebears. So some people might point to a lighter engine as being less strong or less sturdy. These engines are still pretty strong and pretty reliable, so we've not seen any major issues from these engines yet. So lubrication has been improved in the Gen 3 engine. There's a new oil separator that's been incorporated into the engine block itself, and that really improves the efficiency of the crankcase ventilation system. Remember the problems people had with carbon deposits on the valves with the air coming in through the crankcase ventilation system? Well, Volkswagen themselves have come up with a system now to separate that oil out. So there's little need to fit an oil separator or oil catch can yourself to these Gen 3 engines. So we've got a new design of crankshaft, lighter pistons, and a lighter flywheel. So overall, this engine is lighter. You're going to feel the power much more in these engines. You're going away from the old heavy diesel units of years gone by. And we've got a really refined diesel engine that we're working with now. So I've always maintained that on some of the older diesel engines, you shouldn't go with a lighter flywheel or convert from a dual mass to a single mass. But it does seem on these engines, they are much more refined, much smoother. You can get away with the lighter dual mass flywheels or even the single mass flywheels. Some people that have fitted them recommend increasing the tick over slightly just to avoid the problems they were getting with stalling. But let me know in the comments what your experience has been with a lighter flywheel on these Gen 3 engines. The camshaft drive has also been revised. So instead of the problems you had with the timing chain, they've now switched to a toothed belt. Which really does smooth things out. Obviously, you need to get those changed probably a little bit shorter than the manufacturer's specified intervals, especially if you've tuned it and you're getting more power out of it. But it's a big improvement. It cuts down on the weight, and we're not going to see any more issues with timing chains, stretching, tensioners, braking, that sort of thing. Or at least we hope not. The cooling system has also been improved. You've got a larger radiator, a much better designed cooling system, allowing a lot more control over the engine's heat up cycles and maintaining a steady temperature inside the engine when it's actually running. So what's my takeaway comments? I really like the car. The 35 is the right one for me in terms of power, but I do a lot of short journeys. So I still worry about having a diesel engine for a car that only does short journeys. So they've done a lot to address the problems in the engine. So we're now on the Generation 3 version of the 2-litre TDI. So significant changes and revisions have been made over the previous generations to address the common problems that they had before. If you're a high mileage driver and you're looking for fuel economy, then this is a great bet. It's super economical. You've got a really good power delivery. The torque is just there from phenomenally low RPMs. The power band is relatively narrow because it's a diesel. You've got a limited RPM range, but just taking that into account into your driving style, you can wring out every bit of performance from this engine. And with the S-tronic gearbox, the changes are so fluid, you don't even notice all of the gear changes that are happening. So thanks for watching. Please let me know what your thoughts are on the A3, particularly the 2023 version. Is it something you're going to be getting this year, in a few years' time? And will you be going for the petrol version or the diesel version? And what do you think of the Audi numbering system, the 30, 35, 40, 45? I really don't like it. I might even do a video on that. So thanks for watching. Please boot that like button because that really does help us to get out there. I've lined this video up for you, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so because we'd hate you to miss out on all the great content we've got planned for you Audi fans.